From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Business email compromise attacks surge thanks to Gen AI. NIST releases Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, and vending machine crash reveals face recognition tech. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we're going to get ready for some insight, some opinion, and I would say some competence from our guest, Russ Ayres, the SVP of Cyber and Deputy CISO over at Equifax. Russ, thank you so much for making the time for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, before we get into the news, and there is a lot of interesting angles, a lot of interesting stories. I want to thank our sponsor for today, Egress. Protect against inbound and outbound email threats. Remember, you can join us on YouTube Live. To do so, go to CISOSeries.com, hit that events drop down and look for the Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review image. You know what to do. Just click on it and you can join us. If you're in there, be sure to contribute in our chat. We love hearing from you live. Any of your questions, your comments, your concern. I would even accept some bon mots. So please put them in there. We would love to hear from you and help make the show better. That's what we like. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's jump right into it. Our first story here, one of the big ones of the week, NIST releases Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. Yes, a decade in the making, NIST has released an updated framework which now aims to help all organizations, not just those in critical infrastructure, manage and reduce risk. It emphasizes guidance to help all organizations meet their cybersecurity goals with additional resources. The original 5 core functions of the framework, identity, protect, detect, respond, and recover, are now joined to complete this Voltron by govern, with the purpose of broadening a security framework throughout the entire organization. So, Russ, I'm curious, what do you make of the additional function of governance? And, how do you see this manifesting itself and impacting companies?
I think it's a huge step for not only the infrastructure piece they were describing. It's not critical infrastructure there's much worried about now. It's everyone, because everybody has this problem. I'm a huge supporter of CSF. We were, after the breach, that's one of the things that we used to give us a comprehensive framework, a good view of it. And if you've got a policy and procedure-based organization, it's difficult for you to use the same language. Sometimes the policies are going to be inconsistent. Sometimes they're contradictory. So I think this is a great addition for the vast majority of problems that companies face. And then that govern piece is an interesting side note that we found when we ran through original CSF. Governance was sort of left for you, an exercise in the reader. And this is going to be a huge step in the right direction. Now, we took a tact where we wanted to provide a double click on that. So we open sourced our framework, provided that out to everybody. You're going to see close ties there between that framework in CSF, because we took the language straight from CSF. So I think the more and more we share these types of things with the NIST teams and then we use them, you're going to see wherever there's a gap, somebody's going to try to fill it. And govern has been trouble for many people for a long time. It's one of the most difficult aspects for almost any company to implement.
Well, and I just thinking about this, I've seen some feedbacks like, we teased it kind of at the beginning, it's been 10 years since the last update. Obviously, we want these to be thoughtful frameworks, but yeah, that kind of industry, open sourcing, your own efforts and that kind of industry collaboration to build on, like, does this seem like the window to do that, right? Like,
it does.
Do a decade, have companies iterate on it, see what works, and then, kind of informing these frameworks going forward?
Absolutely. That's the way that I believe we should approach it. You've got to pick the right frequency. You've got to pick the right timeline. I wouldn't give too much grief to anybody for it being a decade. Getting a group together that fills all of this out over the course of a decade is pretty tough. So it's a hard thing to do. I think we need industry contributing more. We've got to have some of that interactivity. Open sourcing it, I think, is a great way to do it. Start to share things with each other, see how we can do it, and then let NIST look at what's going on in that market, kind of overlay those decade-long reviews. That is exactly the way I think it should work.
All right, well, our next story here, business email compromise attacks surge thanks to Gen AI. 1,760% is the number coming from a report published this week by Perception Point in their 2024 annual report, Cybersecurity Trends and Insights. They state that Gen AI has helped create well-crafted and targeted social engineering-based attacks that are difficult to detect. In 2022, BEC attacks accounted for only 1% of all cyber attacks, but rose to 18.6% of all attacks in 2023. So, by any metric, a lot. Russ, the report also highlights other new techniques like quishing, which I can't wait for that to somehow to show up in my New York Times crossword puzzle, which is QR code based phishing. These things were bound to happen, of course. So, do you think the future of cyber safety relies on maybe things like AI technology and an increasing arms race? Or can we look at maybe human diligence, critical thinking skills, awareness, for lack of a better term? Or is it both?
Yeah, it's got to be both, of course. However, depending on a human being, to be 100% diligent 100% of the time is difficult to scale. So technology, I think, is about the only way we're going to be able to get a large cut of these problems solved upstream. What I'd like to see more is maybe the personalization that we see today, the technology that's used in that. As you said, you just use the word quishing, so that means no telling what's going to show up in your feeds after this. We have technology that's going to be able to personalize your messages. So why don't we take something that is personalizing that and then frame the protection that you need at that moment with those AI features that we were just talking about. So if you're going to take a look at a mortgage or you're starting to fill out some paperwork for a new job, maybe you are allowed to see more links than you otherwise would, and some AI component says, "Hey, yeah, you can click on these things, they're safe." If it's my parents, dear Lord, don't let them click on anything at all, anytime. And that is what I believe will get us into the right space, the appropriate use of that technology at the right time.
We need a Rust bot for everybody's parents, just in time. And CCL does bring up a really good point in our chat here. He says, "I wonder if increases in attacks equates to increases in compromise." So yeah, always good to think of that. Yeah, maybe easier to launch these attacks. I guess if the percentage is going up, that would be showing that they're more effective. But definitely need to see more research, and we're getting that all the time. Luckily, people seem to be very keen on using it for attacks. So I'm sure we'll
Yeah,
have tons of research on that, but a good pin to put in that and look for that going forward.
yeah, absolutely. We do see that. One of the reasons that we would tell somebody not to click on a link before, right, is if the English wasn't spelled the way you expect, that the grammar is strange. Well, if this tool gives you the ability to not have those anymore, then part of the protection goes away. And now you have to find a new way to give them something to look at. So the arms race is absolutely required, and it's happening super fast.
All right, next up here, definitely a story of note this week. Vending machine crash reveals face recognition tech. Students at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, are demanding answers after discovering that an M&M's branded smart vending machine has been apparently collecting facial recognition data. The discovery was made when the vending machine crashed and an error message on its screen stated invenda.vending.facial recognition app.exe had failed to launch. According to Wired, one student noted that Invenda's sales brochure promised that the machines are capable of sending estimated ages and genders of every person who used the machines without ever requesting consent. So, sounds like a super useful feature. Russ, the company responsible for installing and maintaining the vending machines on campus, stated that the machines do not store photos and are not capable of facial recognition, but are GDPR compliant. Interesting combination of features. They also added that the technology acts as a motion sensor, so they can, start up the prompts when someone shows up to do all the smart stuff. I'm curious, do you think that if this was just a motion sensor, maybe they should have named their executable something other than facial recognition app.exe?
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure about the feature set that you just described going all the way to GDPR. I mean, I don't know what that means. Is there a giant button on the side that says "Forget Me"? So
Yeah, yeah.
you press it and it gives you the right to be forgotten on that machine. You know, Giving them the benefit of the doubt. I hope that this is not their Waterloo, but
Uh,
if I don't know if you saw what I did there, but so when I think through my previous programming days, I could see somebody looking at the user story that said, you need to recognize when a face walks in front of the machine, turn on the video to let them interact with it. I could see that's the case. And so maybe they're trying to name their executable that's going to do that function. And yeah, they just replace the words in there and they go, yes, we are going to recognize a face. And maybe they never intended it to be your face. But certainly somebody's got to think that through before you're going to display the error message. And again, if you looked at it from the security perspective, this is an angle where you probably don't want to tell them what executables are running. You don't want to tell them what components are there. And so even if you looked at it from they may have been doing something wrong, well, they also were probably doing something wrong in bleeding out some significant details of the app out into their user community.
Yeah, I do have sympathy for the theory that this is the intern named thing bad,
Yeah.
like theory of this. But when they also have that definitely in their portfolio, even if this is not the application of that tech, like you need to have that. Yeah, that's something where even for a executable like that that shouldn't be customer facing, I would think just from a certainty standpoint of what product, what services are running, what software is running on this, we would want more accuracy than that. So for
Yeah, and
sure.
what you were talking about for the GDPR piece, the reference to GDPR, I don't know if it did the same for you, but the minute that I see a reference to GDPR, it has to do with personal data. This thing is taking some type of personal data and you need to be able to manage it. So if it was just recognizing motion and splitting up something for someone to buy, I don't know how that you would need to worry too much about personal data. So it all doesn't quite add up for me yet.
Yeah, we definitely need a levee en masse when it comes to more privacy on our smart vending machines for sure.
Totally.
All right, next up here, SolarWinds attackers changing tactics. Britain's National Cybersecurity Center and other Five Eyes Alliance members published an alert last week detailing new attack methods from the Russian linked group that performed that attack. They see the group focusing on stealing system issued access tokens from compromised personal devices. These devices often connect to corporate resources, opening the door to further cloud based platforms. Thank you, BYOD. Once accessing a cloud platform, the attackers register their own devices as legitimate to gain persistence. So, Russ, this sounds like the group's focusing on getting the keys to the front door by picking the old employees' pockets. Clearly, it's not the only group practicing this technique, but doesn't seem, that new or original, still necessarily effective. What do you make of the alert from Five Eyes Alliance, though? And is it just to remind everyone that, the issues that, from this high profile group have not gone away?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of different things. We'd have to ask them to know for sure, but it does give that sense to me that they want to remind folks not only did the original attack occur, but other avenues from that attack could also occur in the future. And then when you look at persistence mechanisms, and you're going to say, even if you were trying to gain access to my machine, whatever means you could use to gain access to the machine is the target and the goal. So using a supply chain attack that's going to get you into something that I'm using is one way to do it, but also just walking up and walking through your front door is another way to do it. So I wouldn't eliminate the message they're trying to send about what the goal is. The goal is to gain access to the internal infrastructure and data that's useful in that company, and they will use whatever means is necessary. And we talk about this often. If you're going to interface as if the person on the other side is going to change their dynamics, their actions, you're going to perform better. If you just think they're going to do the one thing, they had the supply chain attack and it's a one trick pony. If you look at how complex that was, whoever that was has a lot more tricks up their sleeve than the one thing that they showed you. And that's likely what they're trying to convey to us. Still a threat. Keep your eyes open because those solar winds, those winds will change all the time. So you got to be ready for them to blow in your direction.
Russ, I would have prepared more puns if I had known that this was the level of work we were going to be doing today. And I will just tip my metaphorical cap to the game you are playing today. The other person I have to, or the other entity I have to tip my cap to, is our sponsor for this week. Thank you so much to Egress for helping make the show possible. People are the biggest risk to your organization's security, and they are most vulnerable when using email. With more advanced threats getting through secure email gateway detection every day, Egress provides AI powered email security that eliminates both inbound phishing attacks and outbound data breaches. What's more, Egress's adaptive security architecture personalizes security for each user based on the real time risk score. Visit egress.com to learn more about Egress's intelligent cloud email security suite and start detecting email threats your secure email gateway is missing today. All right, our next story here, OpenAI versus the New York Times. The New York Times' copyright lawsuit against OpenAI is up for contention as the artificial intelligence company counters with the argument that the newspaper hacked, in quotes, ChatGPT to create misleading evidence. According to Reuters, the Times first sued OpenAI in December, accusing them of using millions of articles and near verbatim excerpts without the newspaper's permission. In OpenAI's recent filing, they claimed that the Times paid someone to hack OpenAI's product, which caused the chatbot to then, spew out copyrighted work using deceptive prompts, which I would point out anyone could also do. To further point fingers, a representative for the Times responded by saying this so-called hacking is just actually them looking for evidence. It was not, they did not constitute it as such. And they were just trying to use the service. So, Russ, the counterattack method seems typical of the murky world of generated content and clearly a sign of things to come. These issues are not going anywhere when it comes to copyrights and these LLMs. There have been numerous instances where engineers and developers have turned to ChatGPT to answer technical questions, which could easily turn into lawsuits around theft of intellectual property, maybe even trade secrets between companies, countries, and regulators. I'm curious, how do you feel about having this, kind of new plate of problems coming to your front door and kind of everyone at the same time?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult. Not a huge fan of having unbounded problems dropped on your plate, right? It's not my favorite thing. And sure enough, all the items that you talked about are struggles for everybody in the market. You don't necessarily know what is it that it's doing, so you don't have clearly explainable issues. You can't put your finger on exactly where it got the data from. Usually, you might have that metaphor if you've heard people talk about it before, where you can get the carrot into the smoothie, but then once AI has got the smoothie going, you can't redo it and get the carrot back out. That's one of the struggles that I think all of us are facing at the moment. It presents you with some solution or outcome, but there's nobody to go back to at that point other than just go back to that vendor and say, where did you get it from? And have them do some backwards tracing. Now, maybe we had the same problem with Google because there were millions of results and we couldn't go through millions of results. So I think the interactivity portion of this has changed the dynamics so that now our expectation has increased. So here's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that, yes, we're getting a ton more problems than we ever had before, and they're coming at such a speed that it seems like we're going to get in a difficult cat and mouse here. But I also hope that the interactivity is going to drive greater performance and greater questions back to those providers so that we get a lot of those tools back so we could ask those questions of our own AI, kind of like we talked about in the other example.
Yeah, the ability to audit and and kind of and to your point with Google, that was a question of scale, which for to a large extent, and this is fundamentally the classic black box problem as you're referring to. So definitely something that a lot of stakeholders will have some very vested interests in going forward, and we make sure you are subscribed to Cybersecurity Headlines because we will definitely be keeping up to this kind of in the media space and definitely as it pertains to cybersecurity for sure. Next up here, Biden signs order limiting the sale of personal data. This executive order limits mass-scale sales of American citizens' data by data brokers to countries of concern. And if you are wondering who those countries are, usual suspects: China, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, and Russia. Data covered by the order includes geolocation, genomic, financial, biometric, health, and other PII. A Biden administration spokesperson framed this order as a matter of national security. The order does not address the sale of American PII to other countries that are, I guess, of not concern. The Justice Department said the executive order requires due diligence by data brokers to vet their customers, kind of the same way you would have to if we impose sanctions on the countries that we have imposed sanctions on for a large part here. So, Russ, clearly the sale of any asset to countries of concern worthy of executive action. But everyone knows there are no borders on the dark web, and the world's data brokers in general are not known for diligent adherence to any kind of code of ethics. I think we look by past behavior. I'm curious, does this have any teeth at all? Do you see, or is this a, hey, we're at least saying we're trying?
I can't speak as much to the teeth question because that would, need somebody in enforcement, I guess. But I think to the point you were just making, which is the one that I would reference, I don't know how many of the dark web sellers are engaged in firm KYC practices. So I'm not sure that any of the folks that you would interact with on the dark web are going to be saying, "Hey, hold on a second, is this data from Venezuela or not?"
Yeah.
And and in the reverse, if they're trying to do sale of Bitcoin for something and trying to get paid for a particular asset, I also don't think they're going to be saying, "Hey, do you happen to be from Russia, so you can't pay me?" The entire ecosystem doesn't work that way. So I'm not sure that this order is framed at that. What the order likely is framing is more around awareness for the people trying to do legitimate business and then trying to sharpen their focus towards you can't be engaged with those countries in much the same ways you can't engage for sanctions based countries. The sanctions are a little tough, of course, because you're listing out usually persons, right? You're listing out individuals.
Hmm.
I used to work with OFAC back a few years ago, and that's very, very difficult to implement when you're saying Russia, right? Because it's maybe a Russian Federation thing, but when in Russia, how do you see that the packets crossed the threshold of Russia? All the things that you highlighted are super difficult. So I think from the from the orders perspective, it may be enforceable if you can catch somebody doing it. I'm just not sure how you would be able to tell they crossed those borders or that the people are failing to do something inside those borders. Seems tough to find.
Oh, and I just got a notification on my watch. A bunch of middlemen just cropped up in countries that aren't of concern that have plausible deniability. So
That's right.
I'm so sorry.
That's right. Exactly.
But yeah, I think definitely awareness and a framework for future prosecution, should this come down the line, is definitely kind of the intent here for sure. All right, our last story of today: German Applied Sciences University suffers a cyber attack. Another in a series of cyber attacks on German and Swiss schools. The Hochschule Kempten, University of Applied Sciences in the city of Kempten in Germany, has had to take down its IT infrastructure despite what it calls very high security precautions. Representatives of the school do not have a current estimated time for restoration, nor has any group claimed responsibility. So, kind of two troubling issues with the story. Obviously, the first is that this is a technical school professed to have very high security precautions, even though this may be a subjective term. Also, is the fact that threat actors are pursuing these types of technical colleges because the research centers they have lots of data and technology that could be even more valuable than cash. I'm curious, given that U.S. colleges and universities also have lots of research-based assets on hand, what would you advise to, to school or state or federal officials, kind of seeing this as an ongoing trend?
Yeah, my advice would be same as I would give to a business. Look at the risk profile, right? What are you selling? What are you serving? What is of value to you and what are the threats to those things? So if you look at that, if it were the students that were being attacked in this example,
Hmm.
you would imagine all the parents would be up in arms, the university would react. I would say the same thing is true here if you viewed it from the business lens or from things that are going to have research and development. If a firm thinks that engaging with you with research and development has the potential of getting taken and the intellectual property stolen, or the government or anybody else, the university, because the university also would lose, then I would start to look at a cybersecurity program to protect that set of assets. And it would be commensurate with the threat that you were facing. It's a struggle for me to see that you would tell a bad actor or somebody who's coming after you. It's tough for me to see that you would say, "Hey, we've got really good security in place." I generally would recommend to people to just stay quiet about that. Um, just implement a good practice. Try not to flick the nose of the bear in that case. I don't know if you saw what I did there, the Russian. So that's what I would that's what I would sort of describe to anybody is like just keep it quiet, implement a good practice that matches the level of things you need to protect and the threats against you.
Yeah, and it reminds me a lot of times of the the dubious distinction of getting named whenever you're a CISO, one of the top CISO lists, and it's just
Right.
like, oh, thank you, I didn't
Thank
have
you.
a target on my back, but
Exactly.
now I'm really good at security, so that didn't help my career, but did make me a target. Appreciate that.
Exactly. Thanks, guys.
And CCL coming in with the perspective, defending a university network, one of the toughest in my opinion. Yes, I know that I used to work with the networking nerd himself, Tom Hollingsworth, and
Oh
I've heard
yeah.
horror stories of of network security for on the university or campus, as it were. So yes, not an enviable task. For sure, CCL.
Yeah.
Before we get out of here, Russ, was there any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller here for you?
I think that vending machine was an eye roller for me, but it's an eye roller kind of in both directions, right? If it's true, it's an eye roller because you're just wondering who thought that was a great idea. If it's not true and they just accidentally did it, hey guys, the hint's in the name. If you put it up on the screen and it says facial recognition, you're probably going to get some folks pretty torqued up. So that was probably my favorite eye roll.
Yeah, or you run Linux and then no one knows it's a program because it
Right,
doesn't end in exe and no one has any idea what's going on. So another argument for open source. I'm glad this was the theme
100%.
of our show today. All right, Russ, where can people find you online if they are so inclined?
You can head over to LinkedIn under Russ Ayres. I'm happy to engage with as many folks as will be willing to do so over there. I don't keep it as up to date as I used to back in the past. I kind of toned it down a bit after 2017, but happy to engage on that front if there's anything I can provide of value.
And is Equifax hiring by chance? Can we send people your way?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We are hiring. We have a ton of openings. Be glad to chat with anybody around the world. We're a global organization, so reach out to us. We're happy to connect you up.
I got to give a last second shout out to Kevin Farrell who came in with the vending machine already knew you were rolling your eyes, Russ. So
Good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
exasperation function in that app
Right.
for sure. Well, thank you so much, Russ Ayres, the SVP of Cyber and Deputy CISO over at Equifax. Bringing the puns, bringing the great takes. I really appreciate your perspective and your time today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
We will definitely have to have you back. And thank you also to our sponsor, Egress, protect against inbound and outbound email threats. Also, thanks to everyone in our audience today. We can't always get every comment up on the screen. And Kevin, I'm glad you could come late. Just remember to click that bell, get those notifications. And we truly appreciate you being here and participating. And for everybody, subscribe on YouTube. You'll get notifications when we go live. Not a big deal. We'll be back next week with another Super Cyber Friday, hacking breach response, an hour of critical thinking about recovery, containment, and remediation after a data loss event. And we'll have another week in review show. And you can, of course, get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every single day. You give us 6 minutes, you'll be all caught up. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.